Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Derek Nagley. I am one of the associate directors here at Pacific, and I get to be your host for today. So on today's Lunch with a Boxer, we have our guest, Brent Johnson, one of the professors here at Pacific, to tell us a little bit about first year seminar, or we like to call it FYS. You'll learn very quickly, Pacific loves its acronyms. So here going forward, it'll probably be FYS, but just know that stands for first year seminar. This session is being recorded because we know not everyone can make it during lunch hours, so we like to make sure we get all of your questions answered. If you do have any questions today, please feel free to put them in the chat. You can send them to the group as a whole or to me specifically, and I will read those aloud to make sure Brent has a chance to answer any of those questions. As always, we do also have all of the previous Lunch with the Boxers posted, and this one will be as well, and you'll get access to all of those links in a following email after the event. So with that, Brent, I'm going to turn it over to you to tell us a little bit about first year seminar and what students have to look forward to.
Great. Thanks, Derek. Appreciate it. Hi, everybody out there in the virtual world. I'm excited to be here. I actually just returned from Spain. I was taking some students there for a travel writing class from Pacific, and we had a fantastic time. But hopefully my mind is not too jet lagged right now. We got back just a couple of days ago, so I had a few days to kind of acclimate back. But I'm here to talk about first year seminar. So I direct the program and have been directing our first year seminar program for about 10 years. I've been at Pacific for 19 years, and I can that's an easy number for me to remember because my oldest son, he actually just finished up his first year in college. He elected to go far, far away from us. He's actually going to school in Maine, not so much down the road at Pacific, but it's been kind of a special year for me running the first year seminar program, being closer to that feeling of what it's like to have my child go off to school for his first year and see what he's sort of enjoyed and struggled with. And, I actually kind of come out of that being very thankful that we have such a strong first year program that is set up there to help students do really two things. And that is to adjust academically and socially to college life. That really is the most basic principles we're after in first year seminar. So what I can do today is I'd like to give just a quick overview of how we are, thinking about and approaching those two ways to adjust from high school to college, academically and socially. I think when we sort of talk about a lot of these things, there's a lot of information. There's a lot of great resources on our web pages and things like that. So I really will give sort of the Cliff Notes version of this and leave most of the room for questions, because I know that's where we really get into the things that are more important to us and are on our minds. So please feel free to send your questions. So let me start with the academic aspect of FYS. And that really is going to center on, these great buzzwords that we love to use as critical thinking. You'll hear that at almost probably any college tour that you get or whatever it might be. And I like to think of it as really it's a very long process. I don't think that there's any way that anybody could claim to, change someone's critical thinking in one semester of college in a first year seminar. But that's where we begin with. It's the idea of moving from sort of a dualistic way of thinking where you have sort of a black and white perspective on things. Like, I believe this just because. And we want to move that towards, I believe this based on these different perspectives and ways of thinking that I've given to, this topic now. So that really is going to be one of our central goals when we talk about critical thinking. I always like in FYS to begin with, well, like, what do we even mean by that? I think very often we're like, oh, that means I'm going to have to be critical of everything and sort of be snarky about anything that might, have some truth to it. But it's not that at all. It's really much more about sort of cementing your opinions, your thoughts, your feelings on a subject based on, really good research, really good discussions in classes where we kind of open ourselves up to different perspectives. So very often, I think, at the heart of critical thinking is actually really good listening, and paying attention to what others have said before and what others are thinking right now. And that is going to be sort of a key component to setting you up well in college, because in so many of the different classes and courses that you take, you're going to want to realize that we come at these subjects with a very narrow perspective on things, especially when we're younger and we haven't had a chance to really sort of test out like how our thinking compares to so many other ways of thinking. And so I think that, if anything else, that's what we're after in FYS. We do that through writing. We have lots of what I'd call like low stakes writing that we do in FYS, where, we have like at the end of class, like, all right, we've got 1 minute. I want you to think about what was the most important thing that you learned in class today, and what's a question that you're left with. And then we could start with, some of those things. And when we come into the next class, we do other writing where there might be a reading that we'll have for, let's say, Wednesday's class, and we'll post a question based on the reading, and there'll be sort of like a mini discussion that'll happen between students, so that when we come to class in on Wednesday, we really hit the floor running, already having something, thoughts already in place, and that's a great way to start to see how we express ourselves, sometimes more comfortably in writing, and then work on how we feel much more comfortable doing that in class when we're speaking out loud and sharing our thoughts with each other. So we do it sort of through writing, through oral expression. We do it through projects. We end our FYS semester with what we call the FYS Final Showcase. And that basically is where different classes have designed how they want to think about their topic that they've been discussing all semester. And then in the past, we've actually gotten like 6 or 8 classes together over the week after Thanksgiving, and those classes will present their work to one another. And some have a whole class project where they've been working on, sort of like a mural that they bring to that showcase, and they share like why they interpreted whatever they were looking at in that way. And then other people actually write formal papers, and they'll read some of their papers to another class that's done something similar. So there's a lot of variety. There's a lot of really interesting sort of creative approaches in how they want to think about their topic and express that to one another. And that's been what we call the FYS Showcase. There's also, there's a lot of different ways that we do that, within the classroom, and I'm happy to answer some more questions on that that you have. The second part, though, I wanted to discuss before we get to the questions is not the academic transition, but the social transition. And how do we create a feeling of community, a sense that you're going to, from the very beginning, you're going to have this class called FYS that's going to give you a room that your own people are going to be in, and you're going to feel connected with them, so that no matter what happens after that, you're always going to have your FYS classmates as someone that you can talk with. One way that we do that, we start to build that very early on, is that FYS is different than most classes in the sense that it meets the week of orientation. So we actually have our first class before all other classes have begun. And we do that because there's a way that we can kind of break the ice early on. It separates FYS differently than other classes at Pacific. And then we meet every Monday, Wednesday, Friday during the lunch hour. And it's really, other than a few upper division classes that are typically pretty small, it's the only class that meets during that lunch hour in the fall semester. And that really kind of allows us to sort of distinguish FYS in some certain ways too. It allows us sometimes to have multiple classes come together. There might be a guest speaker, or there may be, a certain project that they're going to work on. And it really kind of allows us to kind of use the idea of the program during a common time to be able to do things that other classes wouldn't be able to do. And then finally, there's a couple other things too with the social adjustment and how FYS really attends to that. And one is through our FYS class mentors. And basically that's generally a junior or a senior that was, has typically gone through FYS themselves or has been at Pacific for a couple of years. And they send in on each class, and they are trained basically to be a really good resource for students at Pacific. So they will know all the places to go on campus, when to get in line for lunch, right? Where to find services that are going to be really useful and helpful to them, like the tutoring service or the counseling center, or the the best times to go to the gym, whatever it might be. And the mentors are there as really, I sort of use them in my class as sort of the eyes and ears on the ground, because when I'm teaching, there's sort of a distance that happens there, and appropriately so. And the mentors can sort of keep an eye on, who seems to be struggling a little bit, who might need, someone just to listen to them today, have some different conversations. Oftentimes too, the mentors are really academically the cream of the crop at Pacific. And so many times if there's some things about, writing the paper that's due in FYS or another class, the mentor can be a great resource for them, sort of like in that tutor role that, students can use. And there's already sort of that built-in relationship they have because they see them every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And the mentors are also in charge of they actually were given a few class sessions each semester where they work with the students on time management, bring in all your calendars and your syllabi, and they start putting all those big dates in and say, wow, looks like you got this big chunk of free time on Tuesday. And we immediately start to try to break down that myth of what does free time in college look like. So, we can kind of start to do a little backwards design and thinking, if you got a test in 2 weeks and you have a paper due that same week, when do you need to start writing that paper? When do you need to start preparing for that exam? And those are some things that the students will take them through. One other really cool thing I love that we're able to bring back this year after a couple of years of COVID, which sort of prevented some of these extracurricular things that we have traditionally done in FYS. But this year we're able to attend a play in Portland again as a program. And what that typically looks like is that we have chosen a really interesting play that's going to be showing at the Portland Center Stage in downtown Portland. And we use this as not only sort of an exposure to theater and the cultural arts that Portland has to offer us, but it's also a great way that students in each FYS class are able to take mass transit and get into Portland on their as a class. And so that first time, they're sort of taken care of in terms of how to get from Forest Grove into Portland. And then after that, they feel more comfortable in being able to utilize the mass transit and have Portland just in the back door as something that they can explore and learn from as well. So I'm really excited that we've got our play back. And then another final thing I'll talk about that too, just in terms of community building, is as a program, we actually, each section has a certain amount of money that the program offers them for the professors and the mentors to build some co-curriculars into the FYS. And so sometimes that could look as simple as, taking the class out for pizza before the play, which is actually really fun to do. And it kind of creates this sense of community very early on. But other ways we've done in the past, I know there was an FYS section that was looking at sports and culture. And so they basically used their FYS funds to take their FYS class to a Portland Timbers game. They got to sit in the Timbers Army section. And I know that was a real hoot for them. We've also, I've one time took some students down to like a sustainable ranching operation in Champooey, Oregon. And the money that we used there helped us sort of go to the ranch and tour it. And actually we did go to Burgerville afterwards. I think we used some of our money for that, to kind of look at some other ways that even fast food could offer more sustainable practices. So there's just some of the highlights of the sort of resources that we have that are dedicated to first year seminar, that help with the community building, as well as the academic components. I invite you all to check out the FYS website that we have, Pacific. I'm updating it actually right now, so some of it will be a little bit, it looks like it's kind of in the works. And that's mainly because I just had a meeting with the FYS faculty a couple of weeks ago, and we were voting on which play we'd go to and some other activities that we could do. So some of those things will be updated in the next couple of weeks, but keep an eye there, and that's a good resource for you as well. So I think like that, it really is, it's a very fast nutshell. So sorry if that's just overwhelming, and I'd be happy to answer the most basic questions too. I know a lot of times, some of the questions that I get are just like, do all FYS students take the same, section? Do they all study the same course? And the answer is no, not at all. And that's actually what I love about FYS, is we have sort of a common program where we have these goals. The goals are to, help students adjust academically and socially. And we have those, detailed. But how you reach those goals really is up to each professor. So, on the most basic kind of snapshot, think about 18 to 20 sections of FYS this coming year. So we're going to have 18 courses of FYS, and each of those will be capped at 20 students. For each of those 20 students, they will have a professor and a mentor that are dedicated to that one class. And that professor basically decides what they want their theme to be in FYS. So, and students will get to choose like their top 5 choices over the summer of, I actually do this, a theme of incarceration. And so we look at the prison system in America. And, again, pre-COVID, we actually would take, I really believe in field trips. I always loved field trips when I was a kid. I got a lot out of them in grade school. And so I thought, well, you know what? I don't think that kind of learning will die in grade school. So we would take trips to the Oregon State Penitentiary and meet with men in the Lifers Club. I've had tours of the Washington County Jail. I've had judges, corrections officers, former murderers come to class. And you really get to learn sort of like great perspective of all the different ways of coming at that system from both sides. And again, that to me is like what I was mentioning earlier, is like really good critical thinking, where you start to see, well, what's it like to experience prison from an inmate's perspective? What's it like from a corrections officer's perspective? What's it like from a victim's perspective? And those are all the different perspectives we try to put in there, never really having any sort of one answer that we can come up with, because that's never really the goal of it, but it's more to explore the complexities of all the questions. But you'll see like some sections focus on pop culture, some sections focus on food, some sections focus on science fiction, right? And so there's a great variety within those 18 sections of FYS, even though they all will participate in the play, they'll all meet before the classes start, they'll all have the final showcase. So there's sort of those common elements that give it, why we would call it a program in that way, even though there's a lot of individuality in there. So because I know that's a popular question, I wanted to address that one. But Derek, if there are some other questions that have been asked already, or if anybody, I don't know if people you can just speak up, that's fine too. But I'm happy to answer those.
Absolutely. So, well, one, you read everybody's mind because that was like one of the top questions. So good job.
Okay, all right, good. I've been doing this a few years.
And the food classes are always popular too, I remember. But one of the questions that came in was just how do the students know to sign up for these? So from the admissions side, your students are being contacted from the academic advising office, and they're giving some steps through their Pacific email on their academic interest survey. Part of that signing up for their advising appointments is choosing that FYS class by filling out a short survey on their top topics. So the students will be getting those step-by-step instructions as they're going through the academic advising process. So if you're a student on here, check your Pacific email and make sure you're filling all of that out. If you're a parent or a family member, encourage them to be checking that Pacific email, because that's how they're going to walk through those steps of choosing those topics and setting up the rest of their academic advising for the summer. There was a couple of questions about basically, does everyone take FYS? So the two big ones that came up, do transfers take FYS? And if you're a freshman bringing in some college credit, is there a way to kind of skip FYS, or is that something that we're actually going to have the students do regardless of what credits they're bringing in from outside?
Yeah, great. So, part of this seems maybe a little bit of a registrar question, but I think I can answer it pretty accurately. Transfer students typically do not take FYS. So they have taken some other classes in their other institution that would satisfy what we're trying to do in FYS. In terms of the other question about, let's say you're bringing in credits, but you're as a freshman, you would be required to take FYS. And I know it's never fun, right? Like you come to college, you're like, what I got to, what I love about college is I don't have to do anything, right? I can just sort of choose. Not really true, right? You still have majors, you still have core requirements. And FYS is one of those classes that is required for all incoming first year students. And all I can say is that it's for good reason. I think it's one of those classes like you will appreciate how it helps you set up to be in a good position, to learn sort of like the different approaches and skills that are going to benefit you at a liberal arts college. So if you have some of that trepidation of like, oh, why do I have to take this class? I understand that, I do. But I really do know that we are very cognizant of that feeling and still believe it's worth your time. And I think you'll be a convert before too long. But just that's a long-winded way of saying, yes, if you're a first year student coming in with some credits, you do still take FYS.
And to answer the other side of that question, that we're getting quite a bit of questions just about, do you get college credit for this class at Pacific and how long is it? I'll just take care of it. Yes, you get college credit for it, and it's a one semester class. So all those students taking this, it is something that's going to be helping you towards graduation. This is not just an extra additional step. Like Brent said, we're doing it for a reason. I took it when I was a student at Pacific. I was a mentor in the class. It's a really amazing opportunity for those students, and not just something we're adding on, but it's really something that's going to benefit those students and help them succeed while they're here at Pacific.
Yeah.
One of the questions was, do all sections go to the play, or is that just certain classes choose to go to the play and certain classes go to something else?
So for the play that the program has selected, all FYS sections will attend the play. Now, typically we don't all do that on one night, because if we have, up to 400 students, that's a lot in one theater. So it probably will be scattered across a couple of nights during a week. The play that we chose for this next year is called The Ripple, the Wave That Carried Me Home. Let's see, I think it's going to be early to mid-October is when we would attend that play. And we really look at that, like the dates, very consciously, because we want to sort of have that experience with our students outside the classroom earlier in the semester rather than later. And having taught FYS for a long time, I see how much that changes the dynamics. Like I said before, it's just such a cool thing. It's like, how many classes do you take in college where you're having pizza with your professor before attending a play in Portland, right? I mean, that's a really unique thing. And you can feel it. It changes the dynamics of the class, and it changes how everybody in the class sort of feels a little bit more of a community. As opposed to like, we're just going to go in and learn this material and then leave the class. FYS doesn't have that feel. That's not what we're after. So all of them that will attend that. Now, the thing that I was talking about earlier, like the co-curriculars, like I visited the ranch, some people go to the timber soccer game. Those are individual per each section, depending on what the professor more or less how they decide to use the money.
So another one of the questions, and I can kind of speak to this, having been a mentor, yes, a few years ago, but do the mentors only teach life skills things, or do they teach actual academic subjects too?
Right. Yeah, Derek, I don't, you probably, you could answer this one really well. But now they would not be teaching any academic subjects, right? I mean, that's going to be more in the expertise of the faculty member. That's not to say though, that there's quite a few mentors, and I think it kind of depends on which one's going to be with which section that year. There's quite a few mentors who are really talented writers, and can explain writing and would work with students on their drafts, be available if they wanted to come by and say, hey, what's my introduction look like? Is this what Professor Johnson would be looking for in an introduction? And they can have those discussions with the students. But in terms of teaching any academics, that is the professor's responsibilities and not the mentors.
And when I was a mentor, again, it's been a little while, but I can't have changed too much since then. So a lot of what I did was, it wasn't necessarily academic, but it was kind of more like Brent was talking, some tutoring, or I would just hang out in the hall one evening and say, hey, if you have questions or you want someone to read over your paper before you turn it in, bring it down. So we helped with the academic, but it wasn't like I had to teach an entire book because that would be terrifying. But we also did a lot of the life skills things. So teaching people where things were. I remember I taught half of my class how to use the laundry facilities in the residence halls. That was an actual thing that people signed up and showed up for, to learn how to do their laundry. So the mentors are there to help them through the class and to be kind of that in between. They've been through a couple of years. They can talk to you about how do you sell books at the end of the semester, but they've also been through a couple of years, so they can look at a paper and at least go, yeah, you're on the right track. Or, okay, let's maybe head over to the Writing Resource Center where they can walk you through this step by step a little bit more.
Yeah, and that's a great resource to have, right? Yeah.
There was a couple questions in here. In here about specific programs. So like we have the Global Scholars Program, and it had mentioned maybe an FYS class. And I know in the past, some of the Voyage classes have had like a specific FYS class they've done. If they're doing one of those, are those set up for the students so they don't necessarily have to find the correct one and hope they pick the right one? Or are those something the student needs to reach out to that program for?
No, that's like, that will already be kind of established for them. So I'm not really in behind the scenes on how students, decide those classes and everything like that. But I know that, the global scholars should be pretty obvious. And it's that idea of, you're signing on to be able to travel then in the winter after the fall semester is over with your FYS cohort, right? So with your class. So that one is pretty obvious. I'm not really sure. Mike Shingo would probably be the best person to ask about, how students make that decision to be part of the Global Scholars. So I'm not really sure how all of that works, but I do know that, it should be pretty obvious when you're in that class, what you're getting into in terms of that's going to have a travel component to it.
Absolutely. And those students taking those, typically those, you're going to sign up ahead of time for Global Scholars, you had to apply into it, or
right.
Any of those that are going to have it, they're going to provide academic advising with a list of like, these are the students in that program that need to take this, this, and this, so that you don't have to do it as a student coming in, because that's a lot to figure out. So we want you to be able to have that planned out, and they will have that when they do the advising with the students. So there's a couple other questions that all involve basically what's the number for the class, or is there class schedules? It's a lot of questions around actually advising. So I'm not going to put those on to you, Brent, because I know you have done some advising in the past, but they're really, really specific. So for the families, we will follow up with you afterwards for a couple of these questions because they are specific to advising. A couple things you can do. You can follow up with the Lunch with the Boxer we had with the Academic Advising Office and Mike Shingle a few weeks ago. So you can watch that. He does give you some really great contact points to reach out. And then, as I said, for the families who are putting really specific registration questions in here, we'll follow up with you and get you in contact with the advising office, but they're really going to be the best resource. Brent and I could make some pretty good guesses, but we don't want to say things that are going to get either of us in trouble. So we want to make sure we'll follow up with those specifically. The questions around class times, when are they posted, what are they listed under? Those are all going to be really great ones to follow up with the academic advising office. There was one other question that I actually don't know the answer to, but you might, Brent.
Mhm.
Are there any online components to the FYS class or any of the other classes at Pacific? And if so, what platform do we use now?
Well, there's like, so we basically will be completely face-to-face in the fall with no hybrid component. Um, there are online, like we use Moodle at Pacific. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Moodle, but that basically is a place where we can sort of house all of our assignments, homework discussions or chats can be housed there. Grade books are kept there. And Moodle is just sort of the standard at Pacific for, sort of keeping all the online work and where you would post things. So there's that component that some, I would say most sections of FYS use, but there's no real like class time that's dedicated to, being on Moodle. It's more of, where you would do your homework and posting your assignments. So I hope that answers that question.
Perfect. So
Okay.
they said, oh, great, Moodle. So
Okay.
clearly they know what it is. So there's also a couple of students who are apparently quite ready to get going on their academics. So I know in the past there's been an assigned reading for FYS. I think I heard through the grapevine that may have changed.
Yes.
But the question that came up a couple of times was, is there an assigned reading? And if not, do you have some suggestions for them that they could read this summer that just might get them on a right path for any of the FYS topics?
Ah, wow. Yeah, that's a great question. So to begin with, we've broken from a long tradition in the sense that, and this may or may not be good news to you guys, depending on which perspective you come from. Mostly, I would say it's good news from what I hear, but we typically in the past would assign a book, so like a novel or a creative nonfiction, memoir, quite often, and it would be required to have been read, and there would be a short, written discussion response or something like that before you ever arrived to campus. We decided that we're going to suspend that this summer. Some of that's COVID related, and some of it is just wanting to kind of review that, like why we do that, how we do it the best way. And so we're actually sort of in the process of figuring out like, how would we move forward with that in the next couple of years? So, so for this year, there is no writing or reading component in FYS. Now, there might be like a certain section or two. Mine would be one of those where I'm going to actually over the summer ask students to read a very short piece. And Derek, you are probably going to be familiar with this one, but it's Plato's Allegory of the Cave. So, we're talking 5 pages tops, right? Even though it was written in like 59 BC. I can't remember the exact date, but I think it was 600 and something. But it's a very old text, but it's really very relevant to our lives nowadays, I think. And I'm going to have students sort of read that 5 pages. And then before we get to class, they will need to have posted something on a Google Doc and then responded to 2 classmates and their thoughts on the reading. So very short, very, again, low stakes, just something to kind of start building some community and get thinking about like what it is, when we talk about where our reality comes from, right? But as a program, we have suspended the summer reading. So if anybody's familiar with that, or if you had an older sibling that went to Pacific and maybe they complained about the summer text that they had to read, you won't have to do that. Anyway, that is kind of off the books this year. There, like I said, there might be a few sections that would require it, or a smaller, reading. And in terms of any kind of reading that you would want to do to prepare for your section, that's a tough one to answer, only because each section has its own specific topic, right? So if you end up getting in a section where you're talking about food, and its connections to culture and society and social justice, right? That's going to be a very different book that I might recommend than one in my class, which is about incarceration. And so I'm sorry, I'm not trying to dodge that question, but it's an awfully hard one for me to answer broadly, since there are going to be each individual sections having their own particular theme.
I laugh because I had to read Plato's Allegory of the Cave. We had to draw a picture of it. We didn't have to write an assignment. So that tested all of our drawing abilities summer before we got to Pacific.
Yes. Yeah. Your stick figures as good as mine are, Derek?
Pretty much.
Yeah. Okay. That's about as far as I go too. So.
Well, you might also, for the students who are wondering that, once you get your assignment from those professors, they're going to reach out, whether it's an email or a letter. So you can reach out to them too and just say, hey, do you have any suggested reading for this class? You'll also, once you sign up for your classes, you'll get the list of required readings for those classes or books you'll need to order over the summer. So you can look in there and maybe get a head start on that as well.
Yeah. And, just as a faculty member, if I had a student write to me asking for some suggested reading, you bet I'm going to remember you on the first day in a good way. So, I encourage you guys to do something like that. It's a great thing. We love it when students reach out and take initiative like that.
Well, Brent, it looks like we've got through all of the questions that have come in. So we appreciate you taking a little bit of time out of your day. As a reminder to everyone, this session has been recorded, so we will post it up so you can listen back through if there's something you wanted to get a little bit more detail on. And again, we will be following up with the families that had some really specific registration questions as well. So Brent, thanks so much for joining us. And we're going to turn off the recording and I will stick around for a little while if anybody does have any specific questions.